Historical Society of Long Beach, and to From Citizen to Suspect, Long Beach and Terminal Island Stories. It's wonderful to see such a great turnout today. Thank you so much for coming. This program is part of a larger program of the Historical Societies called Long Beach Remembers Pearl Harbor. We have two very special institutions to thank for this program today. The first is the Long Beach Navy Memorial Heritage Association, and the association funded the collecting phase of this exhibition as well as the public programs like this one. The other institution we need to thank is California Humanities. California Humanities funded the public programs, and they are the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities that unfortunately is on the chopping block for the federal funds for next fiscal year. The Historical Society of Long Beach is a nonprofit organization, and we're dedicated to the collection and preservation of Long Beach history. We're also dedicated to telling those stories through programs like this one and exhibitions. This Long Beach Remembers Pearl Harbor project was several years in the making, and it required many, many donors, and over 100 people contributed to the exhibition. I need to make a few thank yous to those who made it possible today. Los Angeles County Supervisor Don Kanabe, Evelyn M. Bauer Foundation, Molina Healthcare, James and Elizabeth Breslauer, the Mattson Foundation, the Employees Community Foundation of Boeing, the Port of Long Beach, St. Mary Medical Foundation, Leo and Judith Vanderlands, Mike and Arlene Walter, the Miller Foundation, the Historical Society of Long Beach President Nikki Tennant, who is here somewhere, was maybe at the door, Long Beach Airport, Roxanne Patmore, John Dietz, the Arts Council for Long Beach, the DeLong Family Charitable Foundation, Diane Jacobus, the Dawn Temple Charitable Foundation, Joan and Joseph Van Houten, John and Elizabeth Hancock, Christy Fisher and Joe Vanderhorst, and the Long Beach Convention and Entertainment Center. Our nation's treatment of Japanese Americans and immigrants during World War II was disgraceful. I am, however, proud of the Historical Society's efforts to tell these tragic stories and to remind our audiences of the civil rights violations that took place. We share this history in the hope that something like that never happens again, a mass incarceration of a group of innocent people. Thank you to all of those who willingly shared your stories, your family's stories, and your photographs. It's important for the next generation to understand what happened. I'd like to introduce Karen Harper. She's been collecting the histories of Japanese Americans for over 20 years and helping the Historical Society of Long Beach to tell those stories. Karen's an oral historian whose master's thesis was about a Hmong woman named C. Lee and her people's journeys told through a traditional needlepoint story cloth. So next I'd like to call up Karen.
Along with Julie and everyone else at the Historical Society, we want to tell you how delighted we are to have you all here. The first thing I want to do is acknowledge research helpers in this process of gathering stories over the last 15 to 20 years, who's counting. We've been gathering stories to present and have them acted out at our cemetery tours. So first, I want to thank my buddy and collaborator, Linda Nishida Gager. And her buddy and collaborator, Aiko Tsuchiyama Takeshita. And Aiko's husband, Mas. And Francis, is she lying? Francis, where are you? Raise your hand. And Geraldine Natz for co-authoring and creating the support for Terminal Island Lost Communities of Los Angeles Harbor, co-written by Naomi Hirahara. Naomi is going to be our first presenter. She is an award-winning author, historian, and exhibit curator. Naomi grew up in South Pasadena, graduated from Stanford, studied Japanese in Japan, volunteered in Ghana. She's the former editor of Rafu Shimpo. She is the author of many books, including Green Makers, Japanese American Gardeners in Southern California, biographies of George Aratani, founder of Mikasa, and strawberry farmer, and I apologize if I don't pronounce these right, Manabe Hirosaki.
Good.
Co-author of Silent Scars of Healing Hands, Oral Histories of Japanese American Doctors in World War II Detention Camps. And that's a book that I reviewed for the Southwest Oral History Association. I have a copy of it up here. She's also writing 2 murder mystery series, one of them inspired by your father, and the character is Mas Arai, who is a Japanese gardener and reluctant investigator and Hiroshima survivor. And that first series, the first in that series, is in the process of being developed for a film. As I said before, her presentation is going to be based on the book, Terminal Island, Lost Communities of Los Angeles Harbor, that is co-authored by Geraldine Natz and published by Angel City Press and has received several awards, including the Bruckman Award for Excellence from the Los Angeles Public Library. Our second presenter is the brave, courageous, generous Terminal Islander, Joe Ozaki. I'm going to be interviewing him about some of his experiences as the second part of the presentation. In the third part, I will be talking about some of the people we learned about for the cemetery tours, Long Beach and Terminal Islanders. So before we begin all this, I want to ask everyone for a moment of silence. Oh gosh, I'm going to cry, sorry. To honor all the Americans of Japanese ancestry who were deprived of their civil rights and liberties, all the soldiers who served in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, all who served in World War II, and all who made the ultimate sacrifice, and all of our fellow humans who struggled and contributed during those momentous crossroads of history, World War II. A moment of silence, please. Thank you. Next, very quickly, I want to tell you about our memorial wall, the banners hanging up here. This is an opportunity for anyone who wants to put a special person up there on the wall to contribute with a $100 donation to help us with this work. And I want to tell you, my father and my grandparents are up there, and it means a great deal to me to know that their names will be up there through May of 2018. So I hope some of you will think about who you would really like to see up there also. Quickly, I also want to tell you there are important exhibits all over town. Our World War II exhibit will be put back together, and it's a fascinating look at what happened in Long Beach. But there's also important exhibits at the Japanese American National Museum, and the library at CSU Dominguez Hills has a whole exhibit on Executive Order 9066. So that's the introduction, and now let's welcome Naomi.
You know I'm not from Long Beach. I'm from San Gabriel Valley, but I really want to honor the people who are actually true Terminal Islanders. So if you were either born or raised in Terminal Island, can you raise your hand right now? Raise your hand. So you saw where those hands were, so maybe after the program, like maybe talk story with your neighbor and find out more. And I think, Chizu, you may be how old are you, Chizu? I know that's a secret, I'm sorry. Is it a secret? Okay. But it may be like over 90, so you might want to talk to Chizu as well. Oh, sorry, Chizu, I'm sorry. Okay, so I had the great honor of working on this book, Terminal Island, the Lost Communities of Los Angeles Harbor. And as was said, I worked in conjunction with Geraldine Nance, who was really the person, she was the former port director, and this book was actually her idea. And I know I saw Min Tonai here too, thanks Min of the Terminal Islanders, and he helped immensely for this book to become a reality. So here on the cover, I know the image is maybe a little small for you in the back, but this is a cenotype. This was, it's a type of photography, and it's purposely blue like this. This was taken by Olive Percival, and this was in the 19th century. And it's just so idyllic of how you picture, right, Los Angeles Harbor back then. So this book is centered not necessarily on the port itself, but on the people. And the people who lived there from 1800s, of course, until little after the start of World War II. So here, we probably haven't, it's hard to figure out where Terminal Island is, right? Unless you've actually been there. So this is an aerial view of the port. And then the island in the middle is Terminal Island. And the only way you can get to it is through a bridge. And this is land that has gone through enormous changes over the years. It's, a lot of it is man-made.
That's right. Almost.
So here's another map as well. If you look at the book later, you'll get to see more of it. This was Terminal Island in 1900. As you can see, it's just a little slip of land. It was very difficult for the ships to actually go in because of the winds, and there was no jetties or so they had to alter it. Here, okay, one thing I wanted to mention is Harbor College. Harbor College was very helpful to us. They had a couple things. The former librarian there, Camille Baxter, lived on the island. So she collected the photos of people who lived there from the mid-1800s. So we have photos like this. And also I want to credit the librarian, Tracy Lilly, who helped us as well. And I'll talk to you about another collection of photos that we found there. But as you can see, there were wealthy people that lived on Terminal Island, Brighton Beach area at one time. They had big summer estates, they had big families, and they vacationed there. But over the decades, it changed. There were squatters there. The woman who had taken that initial photo, Olive Percival, she actually lived where I live, kind of in the Highland Park area. And there were a group of artists that came down, and there were squatters. So when people were leaving Terminal Island, some of the wealthy people even, these artistic squatters came in and lived there and did painting and wrote books, and John London was there for a brief time as well. So that whole area has a fascinating history. So the government was trying to get these people out, the squatters out of the area. So there's always been a history of displacement in Terminal Island. Another map, again, it's going to be kind of hard for you to see, but Fish Harbor is to your left. And there was no fish, that's where the Japanese fishing village was. That was Fish Harbor. And Terminal Island, actually, there was another community called Terminal that was more multicultural on that strip of land. So a lot of times when we say Terminal Island, we just think of Fish Harbor, but there was more people living in that area. This is one of the great things about working on this project were two things. One was we were able to get to the digitized port's minutes, and we were also able to get to some of the old photos from the port. So this particular photo, let's see. It was, this is S. Yamamoto. He had a boat business. I think this was taken in 1913, 1914. So very, very early. If you can't see from that distance, but there, what I found cool in the photo was there was a clothesline with clothes drying there. So, but as you could see, it's very remote at that particular time. But we found those records in the port minutes. So this is another thing that's interesting for this project was actually how technology really helped. And I don't know if many of you know Facebook, social media, and you probably look at it with disdain, but it really came in handy here because I would just put on my Facebook page, I'm looking for, stories about terminal islanders. And one of my friends, I didn't know, his great-granduncle was on the island. And I just, he had, messaged me early, and I just kind of put it aside. But then when I was doing research in 1918, they had a House committee on hearings on immigration, the problem of immigration. And this whole hearing, of course, was on Japanese immigrants. And what a menace, what a problem, what are we going to do with these people? And there was a San Francisco congressman who was very instrumental in getting the hearing going. When I was reading the testimony, there was a person who was the secretary of the Southern California Fishermen's Association, and they were headquartered in Terminal Island. And this gentleman was incredibly articulate. I just was amazed, and his name was Kihei Nasu. And he was saying, well, why are you targeting us, Japanese, when 2/3 of the immigrants who do fishing are Europeans? They're like Yugoslavian. Why are you going after us, And which is a really good point. And the thing is, at that time, a Yugoslavian immigrant could become a citizen. They could become naturalized. A Japanese immigrant could not become a citizen, right? And that wasn't way until 1952, 1953. Can you imagine that? So a lot of times when we say, well, 2/3 of those incarcerated were American citizens, 1/3 were not citizens, they couldn't even be citizens if they wanted to. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. So I think a couple things, when I read Kihei Nasu's testimony, couple things, and he had written it, he hadn't gone to DC or San Francisco to testify. One was that, I had stereotypes of terminal islanders because I worked at the Ralph Shimpo, and I would go to these, which is a Japanese-American newspaper, I would go to the picnics and things, and, I don't know if you know Charlie Hamasaki, who's a character, and everyone was kind of speaking rough and tumble Japanese, and I was going, okay, I'm getting the picture of fishermen here. But actually, this broke a lot of my stereotypes working on this project. It was like, these fishermen were smart. They understand politically what they're up against, and they're gonna, Kihei Nasu was not from Terminal Island. He studied at Cornell College, not in New York, but in Ohio. He got a degree. He was working for a newspaper in Watsonville, and the fishermen recruited him to represent them. They wanted someone who was English speaking. So that was really interesting to me, and it was a constant fight. Every single year, the government wanted to take the fishing licenses from Japanese immigrants, and this contingent had to go to Sacramento every single year to say no. So it was these terminal islanders were extremely sophisticated. With Kihei Nasu, he had And it turns out, like I was asking Terminal Islanders, do you know Nasu? Do you know? Nobody knew Nasu. And Nasu means, I'm sure it wasn't in his case, but it also means it could be part of like eggplant. So it's Nasubi, so it's kind of in my mind, like, you don't know Nasu. And then it turns out, I was looking through my old records, my friend who had emailed me or messaged me, he said, my great-granduncle was named Kihei Nasu. It's like, oh my gosh. So I got the whole story. And what happened was he kind of read the writing on the wall. He said, there's too much discrimination. There was 1920s, 1924, there were all these alien land laws. He had 5 children, one a baby that was born in Terminal Island. And so in the 20s, he decided to leave with his family. So that's why none of the current Terminal Islanders knew who he was, because they were gone by 1930. So really interesting. Here, early photo. So Terminal Islanders, you remember the sand? So sand everywhere. And these kids had shoes, but a lot of Terminal Islanders didn't have shoes. That's what I heard.
Just like Hawaiians.
This is an aerial view of Fish Harbor in 1935. So the canneries, why did all these Japanese come to Terminal Island? Initially, they were working on the railroad, because if you think of terminal, the reason why it was called terminal was because of the trains. People were working for the trains, and that's why. And they came down, the railroads came down here to the port. Then they got involved in abalone fishing, and then the canneries moved in. And hey, they needed people to fish for them and to also work in the canneries. So it turns out Japanese were very good at fishing albacore. So they were recruited and hired, and I think all of them were men, but their wives could work in the canneries and pack. So this was I guess, mutually beneficial arrangement. And so the canneries, they built the houses, and it cost each family, I think, around, at one time, like $6 a month. It was very squished, and depending on who you talked to, it was either a ghetto, or if you talked to Charlie Hamasaki, it was an enchanted island. It was an enchanted island with a very strong scent, because not only were they catching fish, they were grinding it up, and I think people who were not from there had a hard time being there to visit. Whereas if you lived there, maybe you became immune to the smell. This is a map of, so Terminal Islanders, what they did was they identified, and you can see it in the book, every single family that lived in that area. You know, so from memory, they wrote, there were like 330 homes that were there. And what was really amazing too was, I think that's why Terminal Islanders are so close. They were watching out for each other. A lot of times the women worked, and so they would ask their neighbor, can you watch the kids? Everybody knew it. Their eyes were on you. So if you did something wrong, you know, your parents were going to hear it. So I think in that sense, that's one reason why it was such a tight-knit community. Oh, and then you all probably know, but all the street names, Tuna, Sardine, Barracuda, Cannery, Wharf, Terminal, Seaside, and they misspelled albacore, it was albicore. And in Japan, the northern side of Japan is, you know, the big island on top where the cows are, is called Hokkaido. So they called the part of Fish Harbor on the north side Hokkaido. The photo on the left is it's the technique the Japanese used to fish, and hook and line fishing. What they would do is, it's a bamboo pole, so they would have bait. They'd throw the bait into the ocean, the fish would come, and they had a barbless hook, and the fish would, you know, bite onto the hook, and they would flip it back, and the albacore would, you know, just fall back there. And I see Clement Hanami of the Japanese American National Museum here, and they have home movies of this. It's incredible to just see them just fishing like this. Of course, there are other types of fishing boats. They were the jig boats, which is the smaller one-man boats, and they put hooks, and I know a lot of kids helped their father untangle lines and put hooks. So they would just go into the ocean, and then the fish would bite onto the hooks. They had more sophisticated purse signing, where it looks like the nets were like a purse. The fish would come in. This is more for deep sea fishing, and they would pull it shut and bring in the catch. So it's different levels. So you had some terminal islanders who were kind of wealthy, and when some of the fish was getting low in the area, they would travel like to Mexico, to faraway places. So they were gone for a very long time. Here, okay, so the thing about they did different kinds of fishing, and can someone just indicate when I have like 5 minutes left and I can go faster. So at midnight, not midnight, but so the sardines, the way they were caught, you fished them at night, and they would have a fluorescent kind of light that would emanate. So that's where the fishermen knew, oh, that's where the sardines were. But when it was full moon, they couldn't see the sardines. So that's when they had like a couple days of rest. So they would fix their netting, and they would also go into Little Tokyo and have a few drinks. And that's why the people, the mainlander, Japanese Americans, they thought the terminal islanders were like party animals. And but as we all know, fishing is very dangerous. I think today it's still one of the most dangerous occupations around. And I just met someone here who said her own father had died in a fishing accident. And it was, so they needed to, my understanding was there was no liquor sold in Terminal Island. So that's another, and then if you were drunk on a boat, chances were you wouldn't be coming out alive. So that's why they did party, hardy. Okay, and here's some families, the Izumi family. Toshi Izumi had done some wonderful oral histories. And then also, this is the Mio family that had Mio Cafe. They had 2 restaurants. I just heard someone here. Their uncle was the owner of Ben's Sweets, which is a business that I saw in footage too. There were chandlery stores that sold fishing things. The thing is, they were right next to each other. There were 2 of them. One was Hashimoto, the other was Hama. And if you couldn't find something at Hashimoto's, you go next door to Hama's. And it was also, they had a multicultural clientele, because a lot of the Europeans wanted to buy like the barbless hooks and other things from the Japanese chandlery stores. Here are the women who went to work for the canneries. Of course, it wasn't only Japanese women. A lot of times the Filipino men were hired to actually do the cutting of the fish. There were women of different ethnicities, but there was a certain kind of siren that noted, depending on which cannery you worked for, you would hear a siren, and when you heard that particular one, unique one, you knew you had to work. And the thing about fish is you need to, keep it fresh. So you had to go there immediately. That's why it was nice if you had someone to watch your children. Children, talking about children. So the first school was started in 1917. It was first called the East San Pedro School, and this woman in the was Mildred OBarr Wallitzer, and she was beloved. She was this amazing teacher and principal, and they, in fact, all the members of Fish Harbor raised money. They sent her to Japan a couple of times, And a lot of their roots were in Wakayama, so that's where, Mildred wasn't going to go to Kyoto, she wasn't going to Tokyo, she was going to go to Wakayama. And in fact, when Mildred unfortunately died, they named the school after her. And there were other teachers that were really incredible that were so loved by the people. Sports, kendo, the Terminal Islanders were known to be very good. Even girls did the martial arts with the bamboo rod. They were very good at baseball. Oh yeah, I bet. A lot of loved ones were in this photograph. And this is a photo from, actually, these are kids from the town of Terminal that I was telling you about. And as you can see, it's not only Japanese, it's more mixed. And in fact, Warren Furutani, the former assemblyman, his father is on the right-hand side. No, wait, is his father? Yeah, his father, yeah. Okay, religion was, the religion was very fascinating to me. There's a Shinto shrine that was in Terminal Island. It was called Daijingu, and it was built in around 1933. Actually, the records in UCLA Special Collections, because they had an attorney who was on the island, who had an office, who was actually, did the incorporation papers for this Shinto shrine. With Shintoism, it's, they have to enshrine, to be official, you have to enshrine a spirit. And they actually got an official priest named Shinkichi Miyoshi, who's a very mysterious person. He was from Hawaii and he was also a former actor, so I don't know how he got into the Shinto priest business, but he was the one responsible for it. And the fox that represents the Inari Okami, it's a sacred spirit. Also very unusual, the first Christian church on the island was a Baptist church. Most farming communities with Japanese Americans, they had Methodist or Presbyterian. The reason why was the mayor at the time of LA in 1917, apparently he had a buddy who was a Baptist, connected with the Baptists, and so they made made Terminal Island a Baptist mission. This woman, Virginia Swanson, who came in the 30s, another beloved, amazing woman. She had a heart for the Japanese back in Minnesota and wanted to help them because she had done a high school paper on how they were being mistreated. And she became a missionary in Terminal Island, and she really helped them all throughout the forced removal, and she went to testify and try to help getting a lot of men out from the federal prison there. Okay, so this is the evening of December 8th, 1941. As the other photos you saw, full of people, completely empty. This is on Tuna Street. What happened was, of course, December 7th, that was a Sunday, fishermen were out working, they didn't know what was going on. They got on their radios and they said, this is a military emergency, you can't be on the radio. It's like, what's going on? Someone said Pearl Harbor. What's Pearl Harbor? There were people who were trying to go to the main, they were in the ferry building, they couldn't get out they were being questioned by guards, like, what are you doing? Maybe some people were going to church. And then that evening, a lot of the men, the leaders of different organizations, the Japanese school and things like that, the Issei, the Japanese immigrants were picked up. So they knew who they were. Things like model airplanes were confiscated. And then on February 2nd, 1942, every Japanese immigrant man with a fishing license was arrested. So this is the photo there of these men in the bus being taken away. So a lot of men, like Charlie Hamasaki, he's such a character. he was born in Japan but came here very young, so he's totally bilingual. So he was pretending like he was an interpreter, you know, in the Terminal Island when they were interrogating people. And afterwards, he was trying to leave, and they're going, no, you have to stay. And then he didn't know where he was going. You know, no one told him, and a lot of the Terminal Islanders eventually ended up in Santa Fe, New Mexico. What's kind of poignant about this photo, and I'm going to teach you a word, yogore. Yogore in Japan means like dirty one. And then in Terminal Island, like I was telling you, the perception of Terminal Islanders by the prim and proper Japanese Americans in Los Angeles, right? So they just called themselves the yogores, and they took ownership of it. One of the gentlemen here in Santa Fe is wearing a yogore t-shirt, and another person is wearing a San Pedro Pirates t-shirt. So I think that's poignant. You know, they brought home, this place, with them when they were incarcerated. Then in February 25, this is before the mass removal, the Executive Order 9066. I mean, it was afterwards, but it was before people were picked up in March and April. They were ordered to leave the island in 48 hours. So this is a young Nisei man, Shiro Matsushita, who's getting the orders. And another thing to remember, there are mostly fishermen on that island. All of them are gone. So who's in charge? Mama with the 5 kids, or the oldest children, you know, they're in charge. So this is our very mysterious Shinto priest who's cleaning things up. See, the thing is, why wasn't he picked up? This is why it's very curious to me. And then this photo, which is on display over there, it's so poignant. And this is the Hashimoto family. I mean, can you imagine a mom, you know, getting the notice, oh, you got to leave in 48 hours. She has young, you know, her husband's not around. She's dealing with babies. I mean, crazy. So all the people, now everybody on Terminal Island had to leave. It wasn't only Fish Harbor. So it was even people who are not Japanese who lived in Terminal. Everyone had to leave. So this was April 1942, and cannery housing, you know, and it was torn down immediately afterwards, removed. Of course, for Terminal Islanders, what it was, they had to move, and then they got the orders to have to move again. And many of them ended up in Manzanar. So just an incredible story of the resilience of these people who, you know, and in Manzanar there was some rifts. Some people were looking at the yogores. I don't know about these guys. But if you just think about everything they had to go through, it's not surprising that some people were angry. So, and the Terminal Islanders today, and then this is their beautiful monument that they started in 2002. I wanted to read to you, I think I have a book here. So about the yogore, there's a song, right, Terminal Islanders? I'm not gonna sing it with the yogores in it, but I wanted to just, this is part of the yogore song, okay. No matter if our bodies are yogore, this is the San Pedro we love. Our hearts are clean. Take a look, everyone, at the spirit of a terminal yogore. So thank you very much.
And I want to tell you, Joe was saying, she got everything right. So the next phase of the program is I am going to interview Joe about some of his experiences and memories of that time. He's our real Terminal Islander to bring some of those stories to life in another way, in a very personal way. So I'm going to start, Joe, by asking you to tell everyone your name and where you were born, and when, if you dare.
When I was there.
When you were born.
Oh, I was born on Terminal Island on November 25th, 1927. And of course, they were all born through Mrs. Hayashi, who was the midwife. Those days, everybody was born via midwife, not the hospitals like they do currently.
And could you tell us your parents' names?
Oh, my father's name was Torakichi, and my mother's name was Mitsuko, or her maiden name was Mitsuko Otsuka. My father, unfortunately, died while my mother was pregnant with me in 1927. He was a skipper on a boat, Seco, and since the captain always uses a winch, he was using a winch in this stormy weather, and his clothes got caught on the winch, and consequently he got caught up and lost a leg and arm, and he lasted 3 days in the hospital and died. So, but later on, about 4 years later, my mother remarried, but I was brought up by my grandparents.
And what were your grandparents' names?
Nakakichi and Fuku Otsuka.
And what did your grandparents do for a living?
My grandparents, my grandfather was a fisherman, and my grandmother was a cannery worker.
So this certainly shows, in a very personal way, how dangerous the fishing career was.
Yes.
How directly it affected your family. So I would like you to just mention one favorite memory of being a kid in Terminal Island.
Oh, playing. Kick the can, and we had a ball there because it was a close-knit family, and all the kids are right there together. So, of course, we had different areas, Hokkaido and our area by Matsui grocery store. That's where we bought all the candy.
So do you remember the initial FBI raid that took the fishermen away? And was your grandfather
No.
one of them?
My grandfather fortunately had the foresight to say that, hey, well, this was right after Pearl Harbor.
Oh, I'm sorry. The first thing I meant to ask you was, what are your memories of Pearl Harbor?
Oh, okay.
Let's go back to that.
Okay, well, first thing is Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. Where's Pearl Harbor? Nobody knew where that was. They said, it's in Hawaii. But anyway, as a 14-year-old kid, I thought the world was coming to an end, but unfortunately it didn't. Yeah, I remember vividly, I was sawing wood on 7th, and this was for the Potbelly stove that my grandmother used to keep herself warm. And but my grandfather had the foresight after Pearl Harbor saying that, hey, we better get out of here. So my mother remarried, and she was in San Fernando Valley. So that's where we relocated prior to the 48-hour notice that the Terminal Islanders got. That was in February, but we left the end of January. So.
And
Yeah.
so what was the next government effect on your family?
Oh, well, while my grandfather was in Tarzana, a few days later, the FBI came and they went throughout the whole house, just turned everything upside down, drawers and everything, trying to find out what connections he had with Japan, which he didn't. And they took him in, and we didn't know where he went, or they wouldn't tell us until found out that a few months later that he was in Bismarck, North Dakota. That's where Charlie Hamasaki was, since he was a Issei. He was born in Japan, and he was taken, and he was, like Naomi says, he was the interpreter there.
So how long did they hold your grandfather?
Oh, months, until we went to Manzanar, and he came back to Manzanar.
So did you go to an assembly center first?
No, we were taken by bus from Burbank to Manzanar.
Directly?
Directly, yes.
So were you one of the first people to arrive at Manzanar?
No. We were the later ones. I was in Blockade along with Marina there.
You still remember the numbers?
Yes, 831 was my number. Barrack 8, apartment 3, building 3, apartment 1.
So what are some of your strongest memories of being in Manzanar?
Well, we were kids, 14-year-old, and we enjoyed playing ball. At first, we didn't have any schools there, and therefore all we did was play. And you know how 14-year-olds, they love to play. We enjoyed it. It was the parents that were the ones that suffered.
How about the food?
Food, we used to call it slop suey. But it was edible. We persevered.
So did you end up finishing high school there?
Yes, I was the last graduating class in 1945. 3 days after I graduated, 3 of us, another Terminal Islander, Tad Mukai, myself, and another fellow, went to Nessa, Oregon to work on a farming town there, doing farming work, 3 days after high school.
So you got released for a work project.
Yes.
Do you know who organized that?
My brother-in-law, Linda's father, was the one that was the crew chief in Nessa, Oregon. So he called us, and we went over there.
So how was that contrast to being a kid in high school and suddenly going to work?
Oh, God. Don't ever work on a farm. That is backbreaking. That really taught me a lesson. That says, hey, this kid's not going to be a farmer all his life. It's hard work.
So did you go back to the camp after that work release?
I worked there 6 months, and then my grandparents had to leave camp. It was in November, and the camp was closing. Therefore, I came back and picked up my grandpa, grandma, and went over to Long Beach.
So I'm going to skip back just a minute. How did you handle the loyalty oath?
Oh, I wasn't of age. You had to be 18. I turned 18 right after the war broke out, so I wasn't, I didn't have to sign that loyalty oath.
Well, what about, I think it was contentious in your family. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
My family, well, there was 4 of us. Grandma, grandpa, my uncle Yosh Otsuka, his son's here, Alan, and my mother, my sister, Linda's mother. And I guess my uncle left for Fresno right after graduation, and my sister, she was married in camp, and they left for Monterey. So.
Yeah, but what about your mother and your stepfather?
They were taken to Tule Lake, and they repatriated to Japan.
Why, after you got released from camp and you picked up your grandparents, why did you go to Long Beach?
Oh, because of the housing. Matter of fact, that was terrible housing, but that's all we had. We, believe it or not, we lived in a trailer court in Long Beach, and that's where a lot of Japanese people went.
So that you had to have a place to go.
Yes,
You'd lost everything.
Yes.
You'd been in a prison
yes,
for 4 years, and where do you go? And people have to figure out,
right,
what are they going to do next? How are they going to make a living?
Yeah.
Where are they going to live?
Yeah.
So there was a trailer court. You want to describe the trailer court a little bit?
Well, originally, these were people that were working in the aircraft industry or shipping because, well, it was for the U.S. government, and most of the residents were black. And as the shipping industry was phasing out, they were moving out. Therefore, we were able to move in.
So did you have your own kitchens and bathrooms in those trailers?
Had community bathrooms, but we got used to it because in camp, all the stalls were open. There's 2 rows of stalls, about 5 potties all lined up right next to each other, so we got used to. At first, it was terrible to be sitting next to somebody doing your thing.
That blatant loss of privacy was really hard to adjust to. But by the time
Yeah.
you got to the trailer court, what was it called, that trailer court in Long Beach?
Los Cerritos or something. What was it? What was it?
Cabrillo 3.
Oh,
The trailer court was called Cabrillo 3?
Well, Cabrillo 1, Cabrillo 2, Cabrillo
those were the housing.
Yeah.
We were in the trailer court.
To begin with.
1 and 2 was the housing there.
Oh, okay.
So I understand that Naomi is doing research on these trailer courts, and that's going to be part of one of your next books.
Oh,
So we'll look forward to that. So was part of why you went to Long Beach because it was the closest you could get to Terminal Island?
no. It had
No?
nothing to do with Terminal Island, just the fact that there was housing there.
And then everyone had to find work. Did your grandparents go to work again?
Yes. Well, it's just my grandfather. I did menial tasks at that time, anything we can get, because discrimination was so rampant, we had to get whatever was there.
So I would like you to tell people that what you worked yourself up to from being
okay.
your career.
Oh, well, as I told Karen, we were working any type of job we can get. So it was just common laborer's job. And I remember working at a meat packing company, but it was common labor and janitorial type of thing because the cannery had a janitor doing the toilets and so forth. But we as a group of, there was about 5 of us Japanese, was working at the cannery. And during the course of the day, we would do the cannery work. And it was canning horse meat. And this was for shipment to Germany. But horse meat is red, and I tried it. It was in gravy. It's pretty good.
Who was that for, shipping it to Germany? Do you know?
Probably through the Army, yeah.
Through the Army?
Yeah. And we were working about 15 hours a day because the cannery worked 12 hours, and we'd have to clean up after that, so we'd have to work about 15 hours. But we were making very good money at that time in 1946 and 47. I think we were getting about 90 cents an hour, but we got time and a half after 8, double time after 10, triple time after 12. So, God, we made about $130, $140 a week, and the taxes were very little at that time.
So what did you do with your money?
Well, we accumulated in 1948. My uncle and I bought a home in Long Beach, 1280 West 23rd Street. And with that money, my uncle and mine, we were fortunate to buy that house in 1948. And that's where my grandparents stayed with my uncle. And after I got married, I moved out. And that was in 1951.
I think it's extraordinary to know how quickly so many of the Japanese Americans bought homes on the West Side.
Yeah, we were fortunate.
And the positive, hopeful approach to their future, to buying houses, just amazes me, and I really honor you for that positive, forward approach to life.
Karen, you were asking me about my career at
Yes.
my work.
Yes.
I started that. I stopped at.
No, but we were glad to hear that. Thank you.
Well, anyway, in 1950, all I saw was ads in the paper. Machinists wanted. That was all over the paper, that want ads. Therefore, I said, "Oh, I love to do machining, tinker with my hands." Therefore, I enrolled at National Schools on Figueroa, and it's Martin Luther King Boulevard now. So I enrolled, and then when I graduated, they set me up in a machine shop. I was making $1.30 as a common laborer, and I worked there 3 years. That was a plastic company. And when they placed me, I got $1.40 an hour to start. And I thought, wow. And so I worked there a month. I asked the boss for a raise. He gave me another dime raise. It was $1.50 an hour. 3 months, I was making $1.60 an hour. And I worked there 3 years, and I was getting $1.90 an hour, and my boss was making $2.25 an hour, and I said, hey, I'm not going to make much more than that. So I took a summer vacation. I looked around for a job, and I found a job at North American Aviation as a machinist. They started me out at $2 an hour, so I said, I'll take it. So I gave them a week's notice that I'm quitting. So I went to North American Aviation, and I was a machinist for a couple of years, and then I got to the top of it, and I said, geez, there should be a better way to make more money. So I got into manufacturing planning, which is how to do the work rather than to do it manually with your hands. And so I worked for manufacturing planning for 7 years. And then a friend of mine says, hey, there's an opening here in engineering planning. So he says, give me your resume. So I gave him my resume, and That job required a degree, and I didn't have a degree then. And so I was going to night school trying to get a degree. And so my boss says, hey, he's going to school at night, he's trying, so we'll try him out. So I got into manufacturing, engineering planning, and there I kind of worked myself up through my friends. It pays to have friends.
So Joe, I want to thank you so much. I want to thank you for living such a full and contributing life and for sharing your story with us. Thank you so much. And now we're going to explore some of the stories from our research on the cemetery tours that will give you a little bit more detail about what happened to some of our citizens. And hopefully you'll get more of an overview. I want to tell you that when we research these stories and reenact them at the cemetery tour, we try to tell the stories in the voices of the people who were buried there. Uh-oh. And we really take them into our hearts. And we're deeply touched, and we end up loving all these people. Okay. This happens to me. So next, I'm a feminist oral historian, and a feminist historian looks for agency and looks for acts of resistance in oppressive situations. So as we're looking at these stories, we're going to look for agency and acts of resistance. This first photograph represents the Hara family who were on Terminal Island. Bill and Cosmo were married during World War II. But to get to the heart of this beginning of this story, Otoji Hara, Bill's father, came to the United States at the turn of the century and ended up as a houseboy at Stanford, as that was a little university, little college just getting started. And because he was a houseboy at the Stanford mansion, he got to take English classes. So he was much more proficient than the typical immigrant. When he and his wife moved to Terminal Island, because he is proficient in English and in Japanese, he ends up getting a supervisory job at one of the canneries. So everybody always remembers Hotoji Hara as the gentleman who dressed in business attire with a white shirt and tie. Because he has so many relationships with the business people on Terminal Island and in San Pedro with business people, they start warning him after Pearl Harbor, you need to get your money out of the bank and you need to take your family away from here. It is going to get bad. So they are planning to leave, but they don't quite get it together early enough, and Otoji is taken away in that initial roundup. So his wife, Kimi Nakai Hara, and his 3 sons pack up their car and they leave. They go to Arizona and New Mexico and cannot find work, cannot find shelter. They end up in Utah, where they do harvesting and eventually end up in the mining town of Helper, Utah. And you know, I love these metaphors. They end up in Helper, Utah, and Kaz has escaped San Francisco to not be interned and joined her mother, who owns a restaurant in Helper, Utah, and her sister. So that is where Bill and Kaz meet, in a restaurant serving American food in Helper, Utah, owned by a Japanese family. They end up, after the war, coming back to Long Beach and going to work at the canneries. Bill ends up having an incredible career with the canneries and opens up canneries all over the Pacific. And his son also ends up with a career in management at the canneries. So that challenge of escaping and surviving and finding work and resisting incarceration is a very important story of theirs. Next. This is our dear friend Aiko's family, the Tsuchiyama family. The parents are Yoshikazu and Kimiko. They start out at a boarding house in LA and move to Fish Harbor. And Yoshikazu becomes a part owner in the boat, the Nancy Hanks. Fishing is a dangerous job. He loses an eye in a fishing accident. And the kids would sneak into the bedroom and look at his glass eye at night for entertainment. And Kimiko, when the kids are old enough, she goes to work in the canneries. And of course, because the men are gone for days at a time, there's a feminist way of looking at this. The women run the families while the men are gone. But Yoshikazu gets rounded up in that roundup of all the fishermen. So now there's no income coming in. And what are these families going to do? Well, on February 28th, there's the 48-hour notice. The husbands are gone. The family has put a suitcase on the front porch with their name on it. They have no idea where their fathers are. Vultures come down, hearing that these families are going to be removed, to buy their possessions cheaply. One of the acts of resistance, it was your neighbor who took an axe to her piano, right? And your mother sold hers for $5? Heartbreaking. So what's the symbol of the piano? A piano is a very important symbol. That means the family is working towards a middle-class life. It means a family is cultured. It means a family cares about bringing beauty into their home and bringing music into their lives. So these pianos that people talk about are an important symbol of the devastation of what is happening to their families. So when the families are going to pack to take only what they can carry, what do you pack? Generally, you pack something very practical. But what does Kimiko pack first? She packs the 3 silk kimonos that she's bought for her daughters to wear in the celebrations for Girls' Day. And Aiko has brought that exquisite silk kimono that her mother packed first as an act of resistance to this assault on their families and their lives. So after the program, you can go up and look at it. The family ends up at Santa Anita Assembly Center, and because Kimiko has a cousin at Poston, she chooses to go to Poston. That's the camp. There's 3 camps. The total amount of people there is almost 18,000 people, and there's camp 1, 2, and 3. And that's where they spend their time. Poston was on the Colorado River Indian Reservation. And then when the family is released, oh no, wait, I have to talk about Hideo. Aiko's oldest brother, Hideo, enlists in the military, and he ends up being in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the famous 442nd. How many in this room know about the 442nd?
There's one here. My dad's 442nd.
Great. Okay, so, my gosh. We're so honored to have you. The regiment goes up to a strength of 6,000. It was replenished 2.5 times. Over 14,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry serve in the 442nd. And they suffer, okay, I can't maybe not do this, 9,480 casualties. They are the most honored. They fought the most intense fighting in Europe. They received 21 medals of honor. Hideo survives. when the family comes back to Long Beach, they can live in Cabrillo because of his service. They don't have to start out at the trailer camps. And the family goes back to working at the canneries. But in 1955, Yoshikazu has another accident, a terrible fishing accident, and does not survive. But Kamiko, as a widow, continues to work in the cannery until she retires and lives a long, happy life and is a wonderful mother and grandmother. Okay, I just wanted to, of the internment camps and the assembly centers, this particular map is in Mishi Wigland's Years of Infamy, one of the first books to be written about the concentration camp experience. The Long Beach story. Long Beach people are taken all over town at different times. This is a list of 9 families, I think I missed one of them, who all lived in a 2-block area on Locust Avenue, and the Grace Presbyterian Church is about 3 blocks away, a major institution in Long Beach Japanese American community. We are lucky enough in our exhibit to have the letter Jesus Flores wrote, and he was a neighbor living in 1851 Locust, verifying to the upstanding citizens of the Sugiyama family. So just to see that, the Flores boys talk about everybody in the neighborhood standing out and crying as all the Japanese families are taken away. Life's great ironies, history's great ironies. In August of 1941, the Japanese American Citizen League Regional Conference is in Long Beach. And this is a boat tour of the harbor sponsored by the Long Beach Harbor. Free, taking people around the harbor. The organizers of this conference are Frank Ishii is the president of the JACL, and his conference chair is John Maroka. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about those families. But first I want to tell you just a little bit about the JACL. The JACL was organized in, 1929. It is a Nisei, second generation civil rights organization pushing for access to careers, access to education, access to fair housing, access to full citizenship for their parents. And these are very active young people. So here is Frank Ishii, who takes on the leadership of the local harbor area JACL. And that is his daughter, Frances. The family lived on Locust Avenue. Frank had a photographic memory and graduated from Stanford. When he comes home, his father is ill, and he takes over the florist business. But the truth is, there are very few jobs that he could get, even though he was a college graduate. On February 19th, the day of betrayal, when the Executive Order 9066 occurs, the leaders have to decide, are they going to cooperate or are they going to resist? And how are they going to help their people? The JACL basically decides to cooperate, probably thinking this would not last long. So as a result, Frank and his wife Isa are helping the local Long Beach people with paperwork and planning and where they're going to store their stuff and where they're going to go. So he ends up being one of the last to leave Long Beach and go to Santa Anita Racetrack. As a result of being one of the last, He gets better housing than those horse stalls that those first people had to shovel the horse manure out of before they could move into them. As a result, some people begin to think that maybe he is a collaborator. When people are in terrible stress, sometimes community analysis falls apart. So the family, after they are sent to the concentration camp, have to leave. It is not safe. Friends help the family relocate to Chicago. After the war, they come back, and because Frank was so helpful with all the Caucasian and Japanese American florists in town, the Caucasian florists helped raise the money to get him started in business again. And I love that beautiful story. They spend their whole lives contributing to the community, and he is the first Japanese American to be taken into downtown Rotary, very prestigious. And Isa, his wife, is the first to volunteer in the Japanese community at Memorial Hospital, and then many other people follow her. So that life of contribution to community, this is a wonderful role model for all of us. And here's the Marocas. John Maroca was the chair of this conference. The family comes to Long Beach very early. Here's father Saburo, his sister Amy, and there's John and his mother Tassi in 1917. They are instrumental in bringing Grace Presbyterian Church to Long Beach. They are the oldest children in the church when the church is founded. And so they were always looked upon as leaders. The Marocas grow vegetables, and they are so successful because they get a contract bundling the vegetables for the Navy at the harbor. They are so successful. In 1929, they take 6 months off and tour Japan. But then when they come back to the Depression, and it gets tougher and tougher. But John does graduate from USC in 1935, but he cannot get a job, and he ends up going to work for a Japanese import-export company until the boycott of sending oil and metals and so forth to Japan occurs, and then he loses his job. Amy, in an interview we did with her, says that her father was one of the first to be taken by the FBI. I don't know that date, but that was her impression. They come to her house. He is at Grace Presbyterian Church, cleaning the grounds and cleaning the church. The FBI agent and a policeman come to the home and demand that Amy take them to the church to arrest her father. And she says the policeman hung his head in shame the whole time, and the FBI agent was rude and nasty. So Saburo is taken away, and for a long time they don't know where he is. When they go to the Assembly Center, the stall next to them has a family with a young man who's just finished his law degree in Japan and come back to the United States. And Amy starts tutoring him in English. He is 9 years younger than her, but they fall in love. Talk about resistance to family disapproval. Well, it turns out she doesn't know, but he ends up being recruited for military intelligence training. So when they get married, she follows him from first Columbia University in the middle of nowhere in Nebraska, and when she ends up pregnant, she requests to go back to internment so she can have her baby with her mother there with her. John gets out. Well, John tried to enlist, and he was told he wasn't wanted because he was an enemy alien, although he was a citizen. So when they come around to recruit in the internment camp, there is no way he's going to enlist. But he ends up getting a job in transportation, which is considered a crucial job. So he ends up in Cleveland working, and as soon as his parents are released at the end of the war, he comes back to Long Beach and buys his parents a home. Their sister Martha gets to go to nursing school. The Quakers develop a program called student relocation and help facilitate young people getting to college. And Martha is one of those, and over 4,300 students are placed in college as a result of the Quakers' work. This is the Sugiyama family. They also lived on Locust. We have written a children's book on Kimi Sugiyama that is in every third grade classroom at Long Beach Unified School District. Kimi and her husband, Shigetoshi, come to Long Beach because he is running a Japanese culture center on Signal Hill. And her parents decide, because he's a college graduate, that he is worthy. She had started law training at the Extension, USC Extension, at Pasadena High School, but her father says if she gets too educated, no one will marry her. So off she goes to Signal Hill. Well, when oil is discovered on Signal Hill, because most of the Japanese Americans do not own their land, they are displaced. And she negotiates with the oil companies for all these farmers to be able to have enough money to move someplace and start over. She negotiates over $500,000 in compensation over a 5-year period. The family, their family, if there's no Japanese community on Signal Hill, they have to do something else. So they move to Long Beach and buy a market on First and Alamedas. It is actually now, it's the first Supermex. That was where their market was. But they do that in 1929, and they've also started building their house on Locust. So it's a terrible struggle because the Depression hits just as they buy this business, and Kimi goes to work for the French Laundry. Okay. When they are notified that they have to leave, Kimi is always a planner. So she goes to the bank and she negotiates for the bank to rent out her house and pay the mortgage. And she tells all her neighbors. So the Yomagitas, who also live on Locust, must have taken her advice because that family still owns that house. And they had that house to come home to at the end of their incarceration. She sews duffels and has the kids practice, seeing how much they can carry, since everyone's supposed to only, be able to take what they can carry. And when she gets to Poston, to Camp Jerome is where they go, there's no kindergarten. So what does Kimi do? What is her active resistance in this setting and her active empowerment? She starts the kindergarten because her youngest son, Raymond, needs a kindergarten class. She has been the president of the Fujinkai Women's Club, and she's president in Jerome. So one of the stories about the 442nd, it was made up of Hawaiians, and it was made up of young men who were taken out of camp. And they were not mixing. And what made the difference is taking these young men to the internment camps so the Hawaiian young men understood what was happening to the parents of the mainland young people. So who is giving parties with absolutely no resources to make these young men feel welcome? Kimi at Camp Jerome. Briefly, I wanted to also tell you about Henry Kiyoshi Fukuhara and Mary Saduko Nishimoto Fukuhara. They are living in Long Beach on Del Amo and Long Beach Boulevard, next to Dooley's hardware store. On December 7th, their baby, Vic, is having a birthday party. The whole family is there. But Henry is picked up, and they don't know where he is. He does get released at the end of the day, but he's missed his baby's first birthday party. the family decides that there's no way they're going to go to an internment camp. So they pack up their truck. They have a truck, resources. They had a truck, and close friends, relatives also have a truck, and they pack up together and they head for Idaho. They've got to find housing. They've got to find work. They do have some savings. They're assuming this won't last long. They do get work, but then Henry is injured doing farm work, that tough farm work, and they're run out of money. They lose their house. They have a hard time even buying food. The family tells a story of markets not even being willing to sell them food. In one situation, an American Indian said, "I'll go in and buy the food for you," because the market kicked them out. Mary is pregnant. They're terrified. So they turn themselves in to Minidoka. They end up in the camp in Idaho called Minidoka. When they come back, to save money, they rent a garage with a dirt floor. And as soon as they can, they buy a house. And they develop a nursery. But they are firebombed a couple of times, and so they change their nursery from the name Fukuhara to Hara, so that they won't have the same experience with vandalism. But they raise this amazing family of artists, and their daughter Aki has been one of our actors at the cemetery tour. So that little overview, I hope, gives you a broader sense, and I hope that you appreciated hearing some of those individual stories. And there's lots more in here that we'd love to hear about. So at this point, thank you for listening to our cemetery tour stories. And now we're going to open it up to discussion and questions. Yes.
You mentioned Vic Fukuhara. Is Victor Fukuhara here? Because I went to school as a third grader at Claremont School.
Vic is at a conference in Las Vegas, driving home as we speak. Yes.
Do you think that might be Victor? Or
Yes.
did he go to school
Yes.
at Claremont?
Probably. Probably. Oh.
So Bernadette ever in Claremont? Well,
There might be more than one. We'll ask him. We'll get you together. So, anybody want to comment on something that?
Karen, I was one of the actors at the cemetery tour. I was Tomeguso Hamane, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And what had happened just about 2 weeks ago, I gave a talk at White Point's Conservatory on the Japanese-American experience, because that's where it started. And what had happened was Patty Yamamoto came and talked to me, and she's Coco Hamade's daughter. And so I was, there was Tomeguso Hamade was the grandfather, and Coco was a daughter, and she married Naomi Yamamoto, who is like a family friend, or yeah, they're just like really family to us. And so it was such an unusual experience for me to come full circle after giving that performance and then meeting Coco's daughter, who I'd never met before, but she's like a relative to me. So I was just really, really excited to have played that part and then come full circle and meet Patty.
You have Tomeguso in your heart. The reason why I didn't talk about them is because they came to Long Beach after World War II. Another time. Thank you for sharing that. Yes.
Hi, I've done quite a bit of research on the 442nd and the 100th Battalion, and one of the things that I found out was that during the training for the Japanese soldiers at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, black soldiers were also down there, and black soldiers were being mistreated so badly down there that in solidarity, Japanese soldiers were also, for example, they could not ride the buses into town. So in solidarity, the Japanese soldiers would also not ride buses into town. So they formed that bond down there. And actually, once they started fighting in Italy, the 442nd was attached to the 92nd Division, which was an African American division that fought in Italy. So they were very close in that particular regard.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, the 440 seconds, some of it.
Research. That's really fascinating.
Lady over there in the corner.
Lady in the corner. Yes?
Yeah, it's funny that you said that. My dad has a story. Dad, remember in Hattiesburg in training, you got on the bus and the black was in the back. What did the bus driver say for you to sit in the front? What do you wouldn't?
Yeah, that's what I was saying, yeah.
Yeah.
For the black people. And from Camp Shelby, all boys went to Hattiesburg, about 25 miles, go to downtown and have steak dinner. Anyhow, the bus driver says, okay, boys, come up front. The boys stayed in the back with the black people in the back of the bus. So the bus driver stopped the bus, said, okay, man, we don't go unless you come up front. So the guys just stayed there. The bus driver says, okay. The guys, okay. They threw the bus driver out, drove all the way to Hattiesburg.
All right, acts of resistance. All right. You want us to tell us another favorite story?
No, Mom. Will you tell us about the Terminal Island boys who went over to San Pedro High School? Remember when the principal would tell them not to go through the gas station? But you guys from San Pedro would get in trouble?
Whatever the Terminal Island people did, us San Pedro people always got the blame for it, so we used to fight with them. Kid stuff, you know.
Yeah, kid stuff. Well, I remember Aiko told us that she used to cut through the yards and get into trouble for that, right? Shortcuts. John?
I just want to make a little bit clarification. In one of the focal the bravery, when the Lost Battalion, the Texas Lost Battalion, was surrounded by the Germans and were able to come out, two of the regiments of their division tried to rescue them and couldn't do it. And so they called upon the 104 to rescue them. And to rescue these 200 some odd men, it ended up being casualty. So that's the magnitude of what they did. And so you have to put it in the proper context of how brave these soldiers were. And they were.
Was actually a Japanese language newspaper that was published in Terminal Island, and I was able to see a few issues that was. It's over at UCLA special, not special collections. This other archive that's a little further away. And it was really fascinating to look at some of the articles. And one of the articles, because young men, Nisei men, were getting drafted actually before Pearl Harbor, right? So, and they were just talking about how they would have gatherings, the family and everyone to send off this Terminal Island young man off to the military. So I found that really fascinating. And not everybody agreed with it, because tensions were high and people were kind of wondering what's going to happen. So not everybody was necessarily all in support of it, but I think for the families, they wanted to do something special for their son.
Thank you. Yeah. Chime in with anything else you want to contribute to. I can't, the microphone doesn't go back there, so speak loudly, please.
I need a little bit more clarification, or I'm completely confused, or I don't understand how, on one hand, the Japanese Americans are seen as enemies, but on the other hand, they're trusted to fight. Can somebody explain how that?
Isn't that a very interesting irony, right?
I mean, how was that argument made, that it's okay to do one and the other?
Well, at some point, the Nisei were considered, Japanese Americans were considered enemy aliens. So they were, but prior to that point, there were some Nisei men who were being, drafted into the war. So, or some people even joined, and that was prior. There was a particular window in which that was happening, and then the government said, no, these guys were, they're enemy aliens, so even if they want to join the army, they can't. But then they opened it up later, and even that was a little bit controversial because some members of the community, they felt, why do we have to prove our patriotism when you're putting us in camp? So there was you talk about resistance, like especially in this camp in Heart Mountain, there were a group of men said, hey, we'll join if you let us out of camp. And they resisted the draft, and they were sent to penitentiary, Leavenworth in Kansas. So isn't it just a bunch of iron? But what I find fascinating is different people had their reasons, and some were on constitutional grounds. Other people felt like I need to do something to show other Americans that I'm American, So there are all these different choices that people took.
That side.
Yeah.
I understand the various reasons why they would have signed up.
Right.
But what I don't understand is how the American government
Exactly.
sold to a country that they're enemies on one hand, but on the other.
Exactly. It didn't.
Well, one of the things they did was ask people to sign that loyalty oath. But, of course, they needed soldiers. So they changed the rules. Yes, and then they sent them up the middle all the time in the worst fat battle with the highest casualties.
Well, actually, some leaders of the Japanese American Citizens League,
Yes.
they advocated for the involvement of Japanese Americans. I mean, it's controversial in the military. So, so.
It's probably still controversial.
Oh, yeah, it
Can I
is.
just add something to that, Liz?
Yeah.
There was a battalion called the 100th Battalion. 100th Battalion was from Hawaii. Okay? 100th Battalion had already been inducted into the Army. They had been nationalized. They were brought to the mainland. So the 100th Battalion was already serving in the U.S. Army. They were all basically from Hawaii. Okay?
Are you saying that before Pearl Harbor?
Yes, before
they were
Pearl Harbor.
already isolated within one
Before
unit?
Pearl Harbor, they were essentially in the U.S. Army.
But they weren't mixed in from the rest of the
Well, let me just finish. So, 100th Battalion was inducted into the Army. They were basically nationalized, okay? Then after the war started, then it became a manpower problem. Okay, so after the manpower problem became acute, then the United States started looking at these Japanese Americans who were already interned and inducting them into the service, but they had to go through a loyalty test and that sort of thing. So there were already soldiers who had, Japanese soldiers had already proven how brave they were. Then the military said, we should start getting these guys out of these camps and putting them into the Army. So that's essentially kind of how it worked.
German?
Sorry?
They do the same in German?
No, the German and Italians were not really treated the same way. No, they were treated the same way as Japanese people.
My name is Elaine, and I teach at Cal State Long Beach, and I was wondering if folks had stories as far as how you continued your education during the internment time.
Yes, we do have some stories of that. Joe talked about finishing high school. Did anybody else want to talk about that? What they did?
I think, Mom, you graduated at Denson in Jerome from the American camp. I found the yearbooks.
So at Manzanar, they published high school annuals, just like other places. But you went to high school outside the camp?
No, Jerome, Arkansas.
You went in the camp. So do you have a high school annual from that experience?
Denson, Arkansas.
In Denson, Arkansas. And the teachers were brought in to teach you?
Yes.
Were there any Japanese American teachers?
Yes.
There were some who were interned there,
Yes.
who taught.
Yes.
And then they brought in some other teachers.
The Caucasian teachers.
So did you have activities like
Yes.
a regular high school? Sports?
All in camp. I mean, in the barracks.
All in the barracks?
Everything in the barracks.
Did you put on theater performances, have an orchestra?
They had, the young people had the orchestra, and they had dancing and all that. But dancing with the boys was forbidden for me.
Pictures.
The Camp Shelby boys were no-nos for us.
You couldn't dance with the military guys, so how'd you guys end up together?
Here in California.
Afterwards.
He heard there was cute girls when he came back.
Oh, is that why you came to Long Beach, because we had cute girls? Yes.
The whites who taught it on the schools got the $2,000 a year, and they taught the same classes. And I was not in Manzanar, but I was forced to teach my own algebra class one time because the teacher had gone in the army. Jack American was my teacher. He had gone in the army. The teacher that was coming from Jerome Camp to teach my camp in my class couldn't come for a month. So the principal called me in his office. I thought I was in trouble, but he called me in his office and he said, "I want you to teach your class until the new teacher comes in." I was going to teach my own class.
Have you gotten that $2,000 pay yet?
So I just read one day ahead, and the beauty of the whole thing is that, well, we didn't get behind. One of the beauty of the thing was not one of the students ever complained to me. I gave tests, just like the other teachers, because they wouldn't give me a lesson plan, so I had to follow what the previous teacher was doing. I knew what he was doing, so I just did that. And and the kids were very good. As soon as the new teacher came, I was back in my seat. We didn't know that. So it was very, very difficult. And there's a tendency to try and sometimes not talk about those things. But that's the kind of environment we were in. It was not easy. It was, we try to make best of it. I was a teenager, so, all these Japanese girls, pretty girls out there, dances about things, play sports. Those are the teenage techniques. But, like, when I went to Santa Anita, they kept telling us, I was at the Assembly Center, right there, they kept telling us, we're putting you in these camps to protect you from the rest of America. We were so angry about Pearl Harbor. We're here to protect you. And when I went in the first day I went in the camp, I looked. The 10-foot barbed wire fences all around us, guard towers with machine guns pointing inward, and searchlights pointing inward, and the MPs patrolling outside the camp. I said, "Oh no, we're not here to be protected. They're making sure that we stay inside." And even though I was young, the first thing I thought about was, are we in here to be killed? Now, I didn't know anything about Germany and what was happening there, but that's the thought that came to me. And I said, "Oh, we're in trouble now." But luckily, I started organizing sports things and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts and all these kind of activities to keep us busy in school. The school was already out, in June, but we had school. Those kind of things happened, and then I realized we weren't trying to kill us. But still.
You were still locked up in a prison.
We were still locked up. We couldn't walk out.
Right. Thank you so much.